On this Thursday night, Canadians finally on the way home. Relief as 2 planes leave China for Canada.
I think it's pretty reassuring.
And a 3rd cruise ship turns into a floating prison. Fiery train derailment. The incident prompting new orders from Ottawa. President Trump's triumph.
We went through hell unfairly, did nothing wrong.
He's reveling in his acquittal as critics rain on his parade.
You're impeached forever.
And poignant performances.
I'm happy because I went here.
Young survivors of ISIS harness the healing power of music.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. One plane carrying Canadians is finally on its way from Wuhan, China tonight, the center of the new coronavirus outbreak. 176 Canadians, including children, are on their way home. It's a plane chartered by the Canadian government. A second plane, an American flight, had some spare seats and offered them to Canada. It is expected to leave Wuhan soon. All the Canadians on board are expected to end up in Trenton, Ontario, at a Canadian Forces base that is prepared to quarantine them for 14 days. There are 2 new presumptive cases in British Columbia tonight, a man and a woman in their 30s. Both were visiting from Hubei province and were in close contact with the second confirmed case in British Columbia. There remains uncertainty about how this virus spreads. And today, Canada's Chief Public Health Officer advised anyone who has been in Hubei province recently should self-isolate.
What we're recommending is for those travellers from Hubei to self-isolate from the 14 days after departure in case they begin to develop symptoms and they then will already be distant themselves from others.
The evacuees on those flights from Wuhan are expected to arrive in Ontario tomorrow, and public health officials, plus members of the Canadian Forces, say they'll keep them as safe and comfortable as possible throughout their quarantine. As Michael Couture reports, they'll still have to go through rigorous screening before they can go home.
Right now, we're just anxious to get on the flight, I think.
You can't see the smile behind his mask, but you can certainly hear the relief in Bin Zhang's voice. After days of waiting, he was finally at the airport with his wife and 2 kids, getting ready to board the Canadian government charter back home.
The fact that the plane has landed, it's right in front of us. I think it's pretty reassuring that we'll be able to get to go home.
Zhang said the process at the airport was well organized, with Chinese officials giving them thermal scans and asking them to fill out health questionnaires. It wasn't smooth sailing for everyone, though. Annie Wang's family was stopped at a police checkpoint when the Canadian plane was delayed Wednesday. They decided not to turn around and just stayed at this gas station parking lot.
So we spent the night in the car. That's very unpleasant experience, to be honest.
Megan Millward got some good news. She wasn't sure her husband would be allowed on the plane because he holds permanent resident status, not Canadian citizenship. But the whole family got on the flight to Canada. And on board, each passenger is being closely monitored by health officials.
Any passenger who falls ill on the plane will be isolated on the plane.
Now, if it happens, that person will be taken to a Vancouver hospital when the aircraft stops for refueling. Same goes for the dozens of Canadians who managed to get on an American plane. Now, all Canadians will end up here at CFB Trenton for a 2-week quarantine.
The National Microbiology Mobile Lab will be on site to test any symptomatic travelers.
As for the rest of the Canadians still in China, a 3rd repatriation flight is in the works.
That plane is currently scheduled to depart Wuhan on the 10th of February and to land back in Canada on the 11th of February.
The only problem? They're running out of room at CFB Trenton, and government officials admit they're not sure where passengers from that 3rd flight will go into quarantine. Dawna?
All right, lots to work out. Michael Couture in Ottawa, thanks. It has now been 14 days since some parts of China were first quarantined, and yet there are still new cases every day. The head of the World Health Organization said today much about the virus remains a mystery and that experts still do not properly understand its transmissibility or severity.
To put it bluntly, we're shadow boxing. We need to bring this virus out into the light so we can attack it properly.
There are now more than 28,000 confirmed cases, the vast majority in China, including a newborn, the youngest case recorded so far. At least 567 people have died. All but one of the deaths is in China. And thousands of people enjoying vacations on board cruise ships are now held captive on them. They've been ordered to stay inside their cabins for 14 days. The Diamond Princess, carrying 3,700 people, is in Yokohama Harbor. 20 people on board have tested positive for the virus, including 2 Canadians. On the World Dream, 3,600 passengers and crew are quarantined in Hong Kong Harbor. 8 have tested positive. And a third ship, the Westerdam, is at sea near Taiwan with 2,300 people stranded on board. There are no confirmed cases on that ship, but it had made a stop in Hong Kong, and the owners say because of that, Japan, its final destination, has now refused it permission to dock. It highlights the perils of contagious disease on cruise ships. Redmond Shannon explains how people are coping.
Another 10 passengers removed from the Diamond Princess, among them 2 Canadians. The Japanese government is keeping thousands on board, including over 200 Canadians.
We're now trying to spend our time reading, watching television, and just trying to stay generally positive amidst a 2-week-long quarantine.
Many passengers are demanding more information.
And what happens when we finally get back to the UK? Are we going to be put in quarantine yet again for another 14 days? You know, these are questions I need answered.
Given the uncertainty with this coronavirus, the Canadian government isn't being definitive.
If they've already been on the ship for 14 days and were well, then we don't expect that these individuals will then be of a risk to the general population.
In Hong Kong, around 30 Canadians are stuck on this ship, but no cases are confirmed.
My understanding is that they're screening passengers, and once this screening is completed, obviously we'll have a better picture as to what kind of assistance we can provide and what are the local health authorities want to do.
And now a third ship with several Canadians on board is stranded at sea near Taiwan, with reports of one suspected case. Japan is joining the list of countries that won't accept the Westerdam.
We're getting more information through global news than from the captain directly. We don't know where we're going to end up, how long it's going to take to get there, and what arrangements we can make to get home.
The ship's owner says it's looking into alternative plans. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
In this country, the federal transport minister has ordered freight trains carrying crude and other dangerous goods to slow down after another fiery derailment in Saskatchewan.
Feel the heat on the windows.
It happened just after 6 a.m. The CP train was carrying crude oil. 31 tankers derailed near Guernsey, Saskatchewan, and at least 12 burst into flames. People nearby say it was like an inferno. No one was injured, but Highway 16 was closed in both directions, and people living nearby were told to leave. It's the second time in under 2 months that a train carrying crude oil has derailed in that area. Transport Minister Mark Garneau has imposed new speed restrictions of 40 kilometers an hour on trains hauling more than 20 cars of dangerous goods.
Mr. Speaker, we're indeed very concerned about the derailment that occurred just outside of Guernsey, Saskatchewan this morning, and that is why I've put in place a ministerial order which is going to reduce the speed of trains carrying dangerous goods for the next 30 days as we examine why these derailments are happening.
The order goes into effect Friday night. Garneau, though, is urging all provinces to implement the new limit immediately. The Transportation Safety Board is investigating the derailment. The RCMP carried out a pre-dawn raid on an Indigenous camp in northern British Columbia, enforcing a court injunction that required workers on a natural gas pipeline to be given access to the site.
And here it is, invasion of the territories.
The police convoy rolled into Wet'suwet'en territory at around 3 a.m. Protesters say officers arrested 6 people at kilometer 39. That's one of 3 camps built by anti-pipeline supporters. Hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en Nation oppose construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline through their territories, although elected leaders of the First Nation have approved the work. It's a key part of the $40 billion LNG Canada project being developed in Kitimat, BC. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is about to embark on 9 days of overseas travel. He's going to Africa and then to Europe. And among the priorities is getting support for Canada winning a seat on the United Nations Security Council. Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, will be traveling with the Prime Minister. David?
Well, Dawna, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is traveling to Ethiopia this evening, where he will become the first Canadian Prime Minister to attend an African Union summit. That's a twice-a-year gathering of 54 African nations. And while strengthening the Canada-Africa relationship is a priority, it will be a secondary priority to winning African votes at the United Nations.
Canada has been a bit late to the game, but the strategy that has been adopted recently has been the right strategy. That is, try to mobilize the support from the multilateral system, and the African Union is the place.
Canada will stand or fall on its record of engagement with the continent, a record that has been decidedly mixed. This so-called Trudeau charm offensive will also have to overcome Canada's on-again, off-again commitment to peace and security in the region south of the Sahara, stretching from Mali to Sudan, known as the Sahel.
The lack of sustained engagement of Canada in the Sahel in the past year or two may be an obstacle to overcome in terms of convincing African states that Canada is serious in terms of its engagement towards the continent.
Nonetheless, Canadian officials are, quote, cautiously optimistic, and they say that regardless of the outcome of the Security Council campaign, they believe this will be an excellent opportunity for Canada to signal that it is ready to be a strong partner with the African Union. Dawna?
All right, David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. You could call it a victory lap by the American president. Less than 24 hours after being acquitted on impeachment charges, Donald Trump felt he needed to settle some scores, and he did it in a stream of consciousness speech, savaging his political enemies who tried and failed to remove him from office. As Jackson Prosco reports, it could set the tone for his 2020 election campaign.
From the stately grandeur of the White House, President Donald Trump launched into a vindictive, profanity-laden tirade against impeachment.
We went through hell unfairly, did nothing wrong, But this is what the end result is.
For more than an hour and with no hint of contrition, he attacked those who tried to remove him from office.
Nancy Pelosi is a horrible person.
And aired a laundry list of grievances.
It was all bullshit. They made up facts. It's been very unfair for my family.
21 years ago, then President Bill Clinton offered an apology to the nation after his impeachment acquittal.
I want to say again to the American people how profoundly sorry I am.
Trump still insists his scheme to pressure Ukraine was right. And he began his day at a prayer breakfast where he mocked Mitt Romney, the lone Republican, to vote for his removal.
I am profoundly religious. My faith is at the heart of who I am.
I don't like people who use their faith as justification for doing what they know is wrong.
While on Capitol Hill, the woman who successfully led the impeachment of a president offered a stinging rebuke of her own.
You're never getting rid of that scar. And history will always record that you were impeached.
Impeachment may be over, but it's clear Trump is eyeing payback in the form of a vicious campaign against Democrats in 2020. And with near unanimous Republican support for his acquittal, it's clear his supporters are ready to back him in that fight. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Hundreds of thousands of Syrians on the run tonight. Coming up, the new campaign triggering an emergency meeting at the UN. Thousands of foreign fighters and their families, including dozens of Canadians who joined the so-called Islamic State, are going on trial in Syria. They're being held by Kurdish forces who are fed up waiting for countries to repatriate them. Syrian Kurdish authorities say the trials will begin in March. More than 1,000 men, 4,000 women, and 8,000 children from 53 countries are being detained, many accused of involvement in ISIS attacks. They're being kept in makeshift detention camps and prisons in northeast Syria, and there are fears they are becoming breeding grounds for more extremism. Frontline ISIS fighters face sentences of up to 20 years, and those guilty of war crimes face life in prison. That's according to the Rojava Information Center, an independent organization in northeast Syria. Many countries, including Canada, have refused to repatriate their citizens who fought with ISIS. And none of the Canadians captured face charges here in Canada, although several have acknowledged their involvement with ISIS during interviews with Global News. The UN Security Council held an emergency session today, deeply concerned about what's happening in Idlib province in Syria. The Syrian regime is in the midst of a devastating campaign to retake the city, and experts fear it's threatening the worst death and displacement of civilians since the civil war began. Syrian tanks fired at rebel targets today in northwestern Idlib. The Syrian military offensive, backed by Russian airstrikes, has emptied entire towns. Hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing, heading towards Turkey's border. There have been several failed attempts at ceasefires, including one brokered by Russia and Turkey last month. And the UN now warns a humanitarian catastrophe is looming in Idlib, and 3 million lives are at risk. Data deja vu ahead, the Canadian-made algorithm that saw the warning signs in Wuhan.
You're watching Global National.
The outbreak of this new coronavirus has led to all kinds of challenges, from the massive, unprecedented quarantine in China to travel restrictions and the race to find a vaccine. New technologies like artificial intelligence are also being used. As Jeff Semple reports, a Canadian AI company has developed an early warning system that picked up the first signs of the coronavirus outbreak.
On New Year's Eve, more than a week before World Health officials warned of a new virus, a doctor in Toronto was already sounding the alarm.
We obviously at the moment did not necessarily know this was going to turn into the next big outbreak, but we knew that it had parallels to SARS.
The infectious disease physician was on the front lines of the SARS epidemic and remembers colleagues getting sick and patients dying.
We didn't even know what it was until it showed up in our hospitals and in our cities. We weren't anticipating its arrival. We basically reacted when it got here.
He's been working ever since to build an early warning system using artificial intelligence.
We were mapping all this information.
His algorithm analyzes tens of thousands of websites every day in 65 languages, looking for any mention of more than 100 different diseases. It then scans anonymized data from millions of flights and cell phone locations to determine how and where a virus might spread.
And that's Wuhan, the capital there.
On December 31st, the algorithm identified a press release from health officials in Wuhan about a mysterious illness at a food market.
Once we did that, within a few seconds, it analyzed the flight itineraries of travelers to destinations around the world and picked up the locations that were the most likely next place for this virus to spread.
That data was then shared with health officials around the world.
The amount of information and sharing of data about disease outbreaks has changed dramatically.
This Canadian professor at Harvard Medical School has developed a similar tool, which scans social media posts looking for information and misinformation.
If we understand the kinds of rumors that are emerging about, for instance, coronavirus, public health can build campaigns to help really educate the population.
And researchers at the University of Toronto have built a program to predict the epidemic's trajectory.
It tells us this thing's still growing. It tells us it'll continue to grow.
Artificial intelligence can't stop the spread, but for the first time, it's providing an important tool to monitor and respond to a global outbreak. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Raising their voices next, the remarkable women who survived the so-called Islamic State. A small choir is undertaking a monumental challenge. They are Yazidi women from northern Iraq, driven from their homes and sold to fighters from the so-called Islamic State. So many of their voices were silenced. But there are survivors. And as Crystal Goomansingh explains, they're determined to keep their culture alive.
It's an attention-grabbing start to a performance marked by its simplicity and grace. They're bringing the music of the Yazidi people to new audiences. Dancing for baronesses and lords, but over the past week they have performed for the Prince of Wales and at Oxford University.
When I do our music and dancing, I feel happy, and I'm proud of our music.
Preserving the religious and country music of Yazidi people is a project of the Ammar Foundation. For 8 months, they have been recording and cataloging the songs. The charity provides health care to those in displacement camps in Iraq. The music project is helping survivors with their mental well-being.
As a method of psychotherapy, it helps us to digest our difficult situation and atrocities that were undertaken against us.
The Yazidi people were attacked with unimaginable brutality in 2014. ISIS fighters descended on Sinjar in northwestern Iraq. The UN called it a coordinated effort by ISIS to destroy non-believers. Girls and young women, such as Rinas, were sold as sex slaves. Men were murdered. Through a translator, she says she wants to go back home to Sinjar, to go to school and to keep performing.
I feel very happy when I dance, when I sing.
The 19-year-old has a sweetness about her, a quality Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne, the host of the event, is drawn to.
They've come here to show people what can be done and to say, we're Yazidi, we're alive, we're doing music, look after us, support us.
The smiles and laughter, a sign of a successful trip. The 10 young ladies will soon be back in displacement camps in Iraq, but they leave having shared something transformative. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Glovertown, Newfoundland and Labrador. We'd love to see Your Canada. Email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.